What's up, guys, and welcome to my 2022 Spring Split LEC report card video. The goal of this video is going to be to assign a letter grade to all 10 teams within the LEC. We're not going to be doing it based off purely their ranking, as you already have that 1 through 10. It'll be more based off how the teams did in comparison to what my expectations were for the team, and also what the team's roster was actually capable of. First, I will give you guys my previous expectations 1 through 10 as to where I ranked the teams before the LEC Spring Split even started, and from there we'll get into the letter grades from every single team. So previously I had Fnatic in first place, Vitality second, Mad third, G2 fourth, Rogue fifth, Misfits sixth, XL 7th, BDS 8th, and SK 9th, and Astralis 10th. And from this, I actually sectioned the teams off into groups. So I had 1 through 5, which I thought would be playoff lock. And then from 6 to 8, I actually predicted all of those teams to be fighting for a last playoff spot. Obviously, BDS didn't end up doing that, but this is what my predictions were before the split. And then 9th to 10th place were SK and Astralis for me, which to me meant that they had no chance of making playoffs. I looked at these rosters, I said, yeah, they're automatically out just from the get-go. They don't have the firepower to compete with the other teams in the LEC. Before we get into the meat of the video, we have a message from our sponsor of today's video, which is Atlas VPN. Atlas VPN was created in 2019 and already has over 6 million users worldwide. VPNs give you online privacy, but Atlas VPN does more than just that. Not only does it encrypt your internet traffic for safer browsing, it also actively scans for database breaches to inform you if your personal info is ever exposed. Many streaming services have geo restrictions due to licensing rights, but with Atlas VPN, you can bypass all restrictions and enjoy any streaming library to the max. If you're feeling targeted in your online gaming, easily avoid DDoSers and even bypass permanent IP bans with Atlas VPN. You can also use Atlas VPN on unlimited devices with a single subscription for just $1.99 with the discount. Right now, using the link in the description below, you can get an 82% discount on a 3-year subscription with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Time is running out, so download as soon as possible. All right, let's get into it. In 10th place, there was Astralis in the LEC season, who had a 3-15 record, which is 17% win rate. And my letter grade for Astralis is actually a C. I think they did a satisfactory job. When you look at the players on this roster, most people consider that they actually downgraded their mid laner from Felix to Dayor. And I personally did not watch NLC, so I had no expectations really for Dayor. But from everyone in the community, what I was hearing was that this guy was going to be by far the worst mid laner in LEC, and I think he actually punched above that. I think he actually ended up doing pretty well. He definitely had some issues with his laning, but in terms of how the team performed overall, I think 3-15 is actually fine. I mean, when you have a roster that's this bad, where no one on the team is above the top maybe 8th place is the highest I would go for any single player in their team in the LEC. I think that 3-15 is actually about what you should get if things went relatively well. I think that there was definitely a real chance that they went 0-18. Their first 9 games, they were 0-9. I could have seen them running that back. But in the back 6, they actually came into form a little bit. They had their own identity, which was this early game team fight identity that actually ended up working for them. They got a couple big wins over Rogue and Fnatic, which are the top 2 teams in LEC. And overall, I believe that this team actually did okay. So Astralis, they get a C. All right, in 9th place in LEC, I have Team BDS getting a grade of D-. Almost failing. I could have flunked them, but I'm a nice guy. I'm a generous teacher. You know, I saw they did a little bit of that extra credit. You know, I don't want to piss off any of them on Twitter too much. So, you know, I'll give them a D-. I think that overall, I could have taken an 8th place finish, a 7th place finish, a 6th place finish, provided they actually had more wins, but only winning 4 games, being 4-14, 22% win rate at the end of LEC, I think is just way too little. Essentially, they could have achieved this with only winning games against Astralis and SK, and I just think that the team should have been better than that. When you look at the players on the roster, you have Adam coming from Fnatic, you have Xmadi and Synkrov, who joined from K-Corp, where they experienced a lot of success, and normally we see people that come from EU Masters actually do pretty well in LEC. Normally, there's not a huge drop-off in their performance once they get to the next level, but there was here. I mean, Synkrov individually performed well, but the team just didn't have much spark. I mean, they ended up winning only 1 out of their last 9 games, so their back half got even worse, which is really rough. I mean, you expect a lot more from a team that has Grabs as a coach, one of the best coaches in in LEC history. And there was not many positives throughout the entire split. I mean, I guess the most positive thing you could say about BDS is that some of their games looked close. Like, it looked like their games were winnable until they lost them, which is nice. But at the end of the day, you actually have to just end up with better results than this if you want a better letter grade. But D-, I'm feeling generous. D- will be what I gave BDS on the year. Next up in 8th place in LEC was SK Gaming, who I'm actually going to give a B. I know I predicted them to get 9th and they only got 8th, but I think they won a lot more games than what you could expect of a team of this caliber. When you look at the roster overall, I don't think they had many advantages in most of the lanes. Their players overall, if I were to rate them, would be mainly fitting into like 9th, 10th place, maybe like max 7th, 8th, something like that. But none of the players I think are super insane on the roster. The most promising player on the roster for me is Treats, and I felt like the team actually gelled pretty well and became better than the sum of their parts, which is honestly commendable. Winning 7 games is a lot more than what I think most people expected. I could have seen them being what BDS was, which is a 4-14 team. Maybe they beat BDS and Astralis and they just didn't have the ability to beat some of the better teams because they simply just didn't have the players for it. Overall, I think that this was a good performance. B is obviously a good grade, but I think that this was a good result, especially in the later half where they ended up going 5-4. It looked like this team was actually trending upwards. So a B for SK. I like what they did right there. In 7th place for LEC 2022, we had Mad Lions with an 8-10 win rate. My grade for Mad Lions was a D+. Definitely don't think that they deserve a passing grade based on how they played. I would have expected them to get top 5 or at least top 6 regardless, based on the fact that they had 3 returning players from a championship team. I think that even if you consider Reeker not the best mid laner, he wasn't as good as Humanoid. Or when you look at Unforgiven and you might say, oh, well, he's a lot worse than kha'zix. I mean, these are rookie players. I think that the expectation for them is still higher than what they ended up resulting in. Not sure if they're going to actually make changes, but it wouldn't surprise me if they made roster changes going into summer based on what the results actually ended up being. And overall, I just believe that Elyoya and kha'zix should have carried this team harder. I think that the team doesn't deserve anything higher than a D+. Maybe D+ is even generous, given that this was a championship organization. They won the championship in spring of last year and in summer of last year. Now, the only reason I didn't go lower is because I actually looked back at LEC Spring Split 2021, where they ended up winning, and they were not a particularly really good regular season team. They technically did get 3rd, but they finished 10-8, so not that far away from what they finished here, which is 8-10. But for me, if you don't make playoffs, there's only so high I can go on the letter grade. So D+ is where we stand for Mad Lions. All right, now that we have finished with the non-playoff teams, we are going to jump into the top 6, which are going to be our playoff teams, starting with the 6th place team, Vitality at 9-9, and my grade for them is going to be a C-. Now, right off the bat, there's going to be a couple things that I need to address. So they technically did finish the same amount of distance away in where I predicted them and where they ended up as Mad Lions. But I think that there's a big distinction to make when it comes to making playoffs and not making playoffs. Also, you must consider that they had a 3-game lead going into the final week, meaning essentially that they only had to beat Astralis to get in. And I think that that changes your mentality as to how necessary all those wins are in the last week, as opposed to Mad Lions, who pretty much played with nothing to lose in the final week of LEC. Also, when you look at Vitality, you have to realize the fact that they are a super team, and super teams historically have been pretty bad in EU. On top of that, it's a perks team that you would expect to level up over the course of playoffs, and they did sneak into playoffs, but barely. So I'm going to give them the lowest passing grade possible, which is a C- to me. I think that they didn't do okay. I wouldn't say that they did okay, but they did just enough. They did just enough to make playoffs, and now we have to see where they go from there. Overall, definitely not the split that you'd desire. I mean, I think that I could deal with, 12-6 being a pretty good record for them. 11-7, I think, would have been fine, but 9-9, barely squeaking in by 1 game, having to go to Astralis in like the deciding match, definitely not good enough in my opinion. So C- is where we're going to have Vitality. On to the top 5, we have XL, who finished with a 9-9, 50% win rate, but I'm going to give them the highest letter grade that we've given out so far, which is a B+ for XL. I think they did above expectations, certainly. It's a little bit weird because you have to understand that their expectations might have been different if they had Mickey X from the beginning. Obviously, he was a really coveted pickup, and he ended up performing really well over the course of the season. But that being said, I feel like this team finally had an identity. XL was always the team that you never really felt convinced by. They would kind of, cheat wins by, maybe coming out with something a little bit interesting. Maybe they had an interesting draft in a couple of the games previously, but this is the first split where they actually looked like a legitimate team. They looked like a good team, and they had an identity. They would play around Drakes. They did have this little weird area in there where they were flipping a lot of Barons, but that being said, overall, this level of performance, placing top 5, finally making it into the playoffs after so many failures so far, I think is a good thing. So they get a good grade, B+ for XL. For the 4th spot in LEC, you have G2, which actually lands exactly where I predicted them. Besides for Astralis, I think the only team that actually ended up exactly where I predicted them before the split. So I'm going to give them a grading of just a B. When you look at G2, I think individually all the players performed at a level that's maybe slightly above expectations. But I think that in terms of the team play and the macro, things that you'd expect a team with 3 solid veterans topside and somebody who's known to have a great mind about the game in Target Bus to be good at, I feel like they ended up kind of failing. I mean, everyone's going to think of the massive throw against Misfits when they were super far ahead, but you also have to think about other G2 games, like the first game against Misfits where they almost threw at Elder Drake again, or they kind of did throw at Elder Drake, but ended up winning the game either way. I think that just this team should have been better around objectives than they were, and they landed in 4th place, which is where I think you could have expected them to land. So I think that they did fine. I think they did pretty well overall, but I'm just not going to give them a super high grading because I think this is expected when you have a roster that's as good as what they had. In 3rd place, with the highest possible grade, we have Misfits getting an A+. I think that this team really exceeded all expectations, especially after you consider that this offseason was not specifically good to them. They lost one of the best junglers in LEC, potentially even the best jungler of 2021 summer in Razork, and they replaced Vander, obviously one of the most historic supports in the LEC's history, with Mursa. The fact that this team actually ended up improving, looking good for the most part of it, they could have potentially finished 1st even in the last day. So this team was actually on fire throughout most of the split. Even the AD carry that they ended up getting in Neon was somebody who's coming off probably the worst split in his career, being 3-15 on Schalke. So that being said, I don't really think Misfits could have done much better. I mean, no, they didn't play perfect. No, they weren't the best team in LEC. And no, I probably don't think that they're going to win any playoff matches. But if you were just to look at only Spring Split and you realize that this team in this strong of a split was able to get 3rd, I'd say that that's massive overperformance. I cannot see it going any better than it did. A+ for Misfits. In 2nd place in the LEC, we have Fnatic with a 13-5 record, 72% win rate, and my grade for Fnatic is actually going to be a B. And this is mainly due to the high expectations that were set for them before the split. I mean, this is one of the 2 super teams in the LEC, and they're a team specifically that was supposed to synergize really well right off the bat. I mean, you have players that are plug and play. Humanoid has just been overall one of the best players in all of LEC for years now. On top of that, you have the best top laner added to this roster in LEC history, in my opinion, which is Wonder. I know some people might debate so as, but they already had the best bot lane on this roster too. So when you consider this massive amount of talent, I don't think that anything under 13-5 would have been considered acceptable, unless somehow the whole LEC was super competitive and 13-5 or 12-6, for example, would have been a 1st place finish within the league by like a decent margin. Overall, I think this team was good. I think that they are probably the favorites to win the whole thing, but they didn't do anything that I would say was out of the realm of possibility or out of what was expected from the general community and myself. So I'm going to go with a B for them. I know some people will consider it low, but this roster just has all the talent. And when you set ridiculous expectations for yourself, sometimes 13-5 just isn't good enough to be considered top tier, the best grade. They did good, but for them, did they do as good with their roster as a team like XL, for example? In my opinion, no. I think XL performed better given how bad XL's roster was, perceived at least before the season, than Fnatic did with their star-studded top players in every single position roster that they have here. And in first place for the 2022 Spring Split was Rogue with a 14-4 record, 78% win rate. This team is going to get an A as a grade from me. I think that the team did really well, but they are a regular season powerhouse. Normally, if you look at the last 3 splits going as far back as 2020 summer, so 3 splits before this, they ended up with a first place, a tied for first place, and another first place. So this team is normally the first place regular season team. And one thing that they were able to prove, and part of the reason why I gave them such a high grade, is that they were able to remove 2 of their perceived best players in Inspired and Hansama and actually maintain form in the regular season, which is super impressive. Nobody thought that Malrong would be as good as MVP Inspired, literally the MVP of the LEC, and Hansama, the best Western AD, being replaced by Comp, somebody who wasn't even in the LEC anymore, somebody who never actually experienced this level of success in the LEC, and then performing this well, I think is something that is super notable. No complaints with these teams, just in general. I think that the teams that they put together are normally good, but I definitely think that they did above expectations. They had an excellent performance. That's why I give them an A. Anyways, that is going to conclude this LEC report card video. So finally, to wrap up, we will actually rank our teams in terms of letter grade. So at number 1, we have Misfits, who I gave an A+. We have Rogue, who I gave an A. XL, who I gave a B+. G2, Fnatic, and SK all end up getting Bs. Astralis in 7th, they end up with a C. Vitality in 8th place with a C-. Mad Lions with a D+ in 9th place. And 10th place is BDS Astralis, who I ended up giving a D-. So if you like this concept, if you like the video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. We will get more of these out to you at the end of splits, but this is going to be the first iteration of the LEC report card, and hopefully you enjoyed it.